Hello, welcome to CSC 239, Cyber Law and Ethics. Today we're going to be talking about internet privacy. So, one of the first things we want to address is personal data. Personal data is when customers provide their data, whether it's their address, their gender, their size, anything like that, and it's collected by companies who then turn around and sell it as a marketing tool. So, for example, companies collect searches and purchasing patterns to then sell to advertisers and companies to directly market specific ads to a profile. And this is called data brokerage. For example, when you use your loyalty card at the local store, all of your purchases are tracked. So yes, they know how much ice cream you're eating. Then companies can sell your buying profile to companies that would like you to be their customers. So, for example, let's say that with your grocery loyalty card, it demonstrates that you eat a lot of beef. You are a big beef guy or girl. Then your information might be sold to a company like Omaha Steaks, and you start getting advertisements for Omaha Steaks because that is a perfect match for somebody who buys a lot of beef. So anyone who uses the internet has a digital footprint, and we call these cookies. They are small data files that are written and stored on the user's hard drive by a website. They contain information such as passwords, pages that you have visited on the website, and the dates you visited the site. For example, when you log in to Amazon.com, they know what you have looked at previously. So they tend to show you products that they think you would be interested in based upon previous viewing history. So for example, maybe at Christmas time, you buy a bunch of toys for your kids or nieces, nephews, and generally what happens after that is every time you open up Amazon for the next few months, you have advertisements for various and sundry toys. The other option is third-party cookies. And these are cookies that are placed across a network of related sites so that a user's movements are tracked not only on that specific site, but also within any site affiliated with the network of sites. So for example, DoubleClick, which is owned by Google, allows Google to provide customized ads whenever a user goes on an affiliated DoubleClick site. In other words, anyone who partners with Google advertising, which is basically like everybody these days. Then we have what's known as beacons, and these are small pieces of software code installed on a user's computer that can track a web surfer's location and online activities. This is used to build databases about consumers, and then they are sold to advertisers. So, like let's say that it tracks your IP address to an area in Philadelphia, and it shows that you're really into music. Well, at that point, you might start getting a lot of advertisements for clubs and music, various new artists that are coming out, things like that. So when you are online visiting websites, you may think you're alone, but you are not. Using a software program called Disconnect, which was created by a former Google engineer, you can identify which companies every website has agreed to share your collected data with. It's a little big brother, but in today's days, we are all accepting that our privacy is being invaded a little bit. Many websites do not require users to give their real name, but the IP addresses and the computer ID number are recorded, and it is not difficult for data brokers to match that information with other online identifiers. There are firms that specialize in doing this. The data that is being collected is demographic and personal: gender, age, race, sexual orientation. So for example, if you're going to a website that has that caters to a certain population like gay men, like Grindr, that kind of thing is going to represent. Also, if you are a heterosexual and you're going on a site like Tinder, that's going to represent. And then, of course, medical issues, which we're going to get into in more detail later. Essentially, anything that you may have looked up on the internet, big data is going to farm that information out. So that time you looked up why you have a certain thing on your thing, yeah, big data already knows about it. So how does all this data tracking make anyone money? Well, you go on Amazon to buy your mom a Mother's Day gift. You end up looking at a dozen different sweaters before you settle on the lilac turtleneck. The next time you log in, you may find your screen filled with pastel sweaters and skirts that would match the lilac turtleneck. You may even see an advertisement for some event where a person would wear their new lilac turtleneck. The collection of information about you has literally made it easier for a company to personalize marketing directly for you and your needs. And that's one of those issues that for those of us who do like to shop on Amazon, it's the same kind of thing as when we're standing in the checkout line at the grocery store and the candy bars are calling our name. When Amazon sees your purchasing history, their algorithm will show you something that you're likely to buy. And you're like, hey, that's not very expensive. I'll put it in my cart. And if you do that every time you go on Amazon, Amazon is one of the most wealthiest companies in the world. So that's how that works. Also, free apps are not necessarily free. If you are one of the billion people who have downloaded the game Angry Birds to your smartphone, or if you are one of the 50 million people who downloaded Brightest Flashlight free app, you may not have realized that the companies that gave them to you for free are using the apps to track your every movement and pass it along to other companies. So a lot of times in these games, what their purpose really is to farm data, in a sense. The fact that we like to kill piggies with our bird bombs, that's just a bonus. The largest data broker is Acxiom, a marketing giant that brags it has, on average, 1,500 pieces of information on more than 200 million Americans. If you had to sit down and write down 1,500 pieces of information about yourself right now, you probably would have a hard time. But Acxiom has their databases and their data researchers and their brokers pulling information from all sources. Epsilon, which comes in at a close second with data on 200 million American consumers, but they don't say how much information they have on each consumer. And finally, WRAP Data Management, which has as its tagline, make one person do something and we build a bond. Repeat that feat with millions and we build a brand. Ooh. Let's look at that first word, make. You're not encouraging, you're not suggesting, you're not alluding, you are making a person. So, marketing is really about compelling someone to buy something. And that's what this data management and this idea of big data is really doing for us when we are online. So how do they get your information? Those pesky user agreements or privacy disclosures, they usually include a caveat that the consumer's personal information may be shared. It is usually buried on page 3 of the 5-page document, and the reality is that most of us just click accept and move on to the website, never reading the legal stuff. So this is a picture from OkCupid, if I recall correctly, and which is owned by Humor Rainbow. Who knew? And it says, you should appreciate that all information submitted on the website might potentially be publicly accessible. So, The other thing is, if you go a little further down, we are not responsible for protecting, nor are we liable for failing to protect the privacy of electronic mail or other information transferred through the internet or any other network that you may utilize. So they're saying, you know what, even if we get hacked, we're still not responsible. So, it really is stacked more in the web developers and web maintenance side of things than the consumer. The consumer really, you have to be diligent about this stuff. And I know most people are like, ugh, this is so boring, let's move on. I want to get to my Angry Birds game. So the government has provided two legal options to control our privacy. First one is companies must inform consumers how their data is being used. The second one is consumers would have to give permission for a company to use their data. And you might be saying to yourself, why don't I remember anyone asking me for this? And it's basically informed consent. Seems pretty simple. Well, here's the problem. The default setting for our operating system and browsers usually are set to accept cookies without prompting the owner for permission. And consumers have to know how to go into their system and change these permissions. So when you get a little pop-up that you see on the right-hand side there, this website uses cookies to ensure you get the best experience on our website. Read more. Got it. It's not saying settings, it's not saying how do I prevent cookies from being used, can I use the website if cookies are being used and I don't want them on my system. It's basically our desire to get to where we're going without looking at 5-6 pages of legal mumbo jumbo every time we go to a site. So there is far too much money to be made by selling consumer information for companies to regulate themselves. Facebook specifically has been lambasted by their consumer base because of all of the privacy issues. And, as we've talked about throughout this class, they've tightened up their privacy policies, but only because people threaten to leave. And the less eyeballs, the less they can promote advertising. It is still almost impossible to use Facebook without giving up some rights to your digital footprint. Privacy laws over the last 50 years in the United States tend to be reactive as opposed to proactive and also very fragmented. On the next several slides, you will see how most of these laws were enacted in response to a situation, not to head off the situation, in case you're not sure what proactive means. So we start off with the case of Griswold versus Connecticut. And this has nothing to do with the internet. It has nothing to do with the world, the technology world. In 1965, in the case of Griswold v. Connecticut, the Supreme Court stated that privacy is one of our fundamental rights. So that's where this comes in. Griswold was the executive director of Planned Parenthood, and she is the woman who is on the left. She counseled married couples on using birth control. Now remember, this was 1965. And at this time, the use of contraception was illegal in Connecticut. So just for explaining to a married couple how to use birth control, she had been arrested and this convicted, and it was appealed and appealed and appealed until it got to the Supreme Court. In 1970, Congress passed the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which regulated and restricted disclosures of credit information. It identified what legitimate uses a credit report can be used for, and also identified how a consumer could dispute those reports. Now, ironically, especially since we're almost 50 years since 1970, the dispute process for the main credit reporting agencies has been criticized completely because it is hard to dispute. It's hard to get into dispute. And more importantly, it's very often, it takes years to get something off your credit report that shouldn't have been there. In 1978, Congress passed the Right to Financial Privacy Act, which requires a search warrant before banks can divulge the financial data of their clients to federal agencies. The consumer is also given the right to be notified and to fight the request if they choose. So, for example, let's say that you pay someone to kill your love muffin, and you transfer $10,000 from your bank account into their bank account, probably Venmo'd or Squared. Anyway, the point is that when the police finally catch you, and they will, they're going to subpoena your bank records. And you can fight that, your lawyer can fight that, but the reality is, depending on the validity of the case, you'll probably lose. But at least now there's an extra step to get to that point where they have access to your financial records. In 1984, the Cable Communications Policy Act was passed, which prevents cable companies from collecting data about viewing habits of their customers. So this then protects the consumer, because let's say that you have a very important job, such as the head of a medical center, and it comes out how much you love watching The Real Housewives because according to your TV viewing, that's what you watch 30 hours a week, instead of the documentaries and dramas that you pretend to watch. So the point being is, what we watch on TV is kept private, unlike what we watch on the internet. There's a thought process. Then we have the Video Privacy Protection Act, and this was passed in 1988, and it bars video rental companies, obviously not really many in business anymore, from disclosing the videos its customers watched. And this law was enacted because a cabinet nominee's video watching history was brought forward by the press during his hearing with Congress, and he, by the way, was not confirmed. So this was done in reaction to that. Then we have the Driver's Protection Act, which was passed in 1994. This prohibits the release or sale of information that is part of the state's motor vehicle record unless the consumer gives his or her consent. This law was enacted because a young actress by the name of Rebecca Schaefer was killed by her stalker, who got her information from the California Motor Vehicle Agency. And for those of you who are under the age of 40, you probably have never even heard of her, but she was in this show called My Sister Sam, and it was in the first or second season when Robert Bardo killed her. Then we have the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. So it's not the COPA, it's the COPPA. In 1998, Congress passed the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which forbids websites from collecting personal information from children under the age of 13 without parental consent. So again, if you're 14, they're going to pull your stuff. If you're 8, parents have to consent. And there again lies the, Mom, you have to put in a password or something, and they do that, and that basically is giving the company the right to collect personal data, because no one reads the legal stuff, and those people who do read the legal stuff are very few and far between. In 1999, the Financial Services Modernization Act was passed. Primarily, it was a banking bill. However, it did require financial services companies to disclose their information privacy policies once a year in writing. So if you have a credit card or a loan, you get a little brochure in the mail every year. You probably don't look at it. You probably open it and go, oh, and then throw it away, or preferably recycle it. Consumers have the choice to opt out of having their information from being shared or sold, but they have to actually do the work and file an opt-out form. And usually on the bottom of that brochure at the back, there's a little tiny 5-point font that says to opt out, mail a letter to this address. And, most of us don't have time, don't care enough, or don't realize that we should be opting out. And again, the other problem is most consumers don't understand legal jargon well enough to know how to do this. So there's a lot of problems with each of these these privacy acts. There's all kinds of issues in there. The one that most of you have probably heard about is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA. And it was passed in 2001, and this law prohibits healthcare providers from disclosing patient information without the patient's consent. It goes into a lot more detail in how you can get a copy of your health records, which was not very easy before, but this one has actually been fairly successful. Now, to kind of look at another large place and see how they manage privacy, we're going to look at the European Union, which is a collection of European countries that work together, much like the United States, but not quite so tightly bound by a single identity. European countries like Germany and Sweden have been much more proactive in developing protections for privacy rights. They see it as a matter of managing data collection. Since the 1970s, European countries have restricted data collection and transfer. So unlike in this country where we have commercialized or commodified data, Europe is saying, no, this is not some companies to sell. This is your information. In 1995, the European Union adopted the European Union Directive on Privacy. And this was literally just as the internet was becoming commercially available. It's almost exact same time. It requires that each member country enact legislation that protects privacy. In other words, companies cannot collect data about their customers to sell to a third party. So, you don't see the same kind of activities going on in Europe that you do in the United States because of this policy. So, another big one is, do we have the right to be forgotten? In 2014, the European Court of Justice, or ECJ, ruled that irrelevant and outdated data should be erased on request. Since then, Google has received requests to remove at least 2.4 million links from search results, of which they have removed over 900,000 links. So about half of them have been requested. Search engine firms can reject applications if they believe the public interest in accessing the information outweighs a right to privacy. There was a court case sometime in the last couple of years over this very issue in England, and basically this guy had requested that a previous conviction he had gone to jail for be expunged from Google, and Google said no, that it was still relevant. So it went to the European Court of Justice, and the European Court of Justice actually said that Google was right because this guy was a shyster, he was scamming people, and he was still scamming people. They said that, basically in their decision, that if somebody commits a crime when they're young, and 10 or 15 years later, they are a law-abiding, upstanding citizen, they can then ask Google to have their information expunged. But if that person continues to be a criminal or a scam artist or just a loathsome creature in general, Google can say no. This is not something we can do in the U.S. because of the First Amendment, which protects the freedom of speech and has been interpreted to forbid censorship. So the fact that you might have been arrested at 18 for public urination, that's going to be out there forever, unless you move to somewhere in the European Union. May I suggest Sweden? Then another topic that is very important to Americans is privacy in the workplace. Some employers monitor employees' emails, while others observe the movement of employees using video monitoring as well as review the employees' internet activity. So if during your lunchtime while you're eating your peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you like to watch a little pornography in your office, there's a good chance that the IT department is monitoring what you're doing. And if they decide they'd like to terminate you, they have full cause. Some companies use employee internet management software, and these tools are referred to as EIM software. So, for example, Silent Watch is a software tool that allows businesses to see every keystroke an employee makes at their computer, including deletions. So if you are ranting to a friend of yours through the intranet's chat feature, or if you're on Google Chat or Facebook Messenger and you are going off about how much you hate your boss, he might or she might see that. Employers claim that EIM software helps them guard their trade secrets as well as prevent abuses of their computer system. So even though we might see this as a significant invasion of privacy, especially where we spend 40 to 50 hours a week, this is considered legal. In Europe, employees receive more legal protection for their privacy at work. Personal dignity is seen as much more important in these countries than in the United States. Essentially, in the U.S., the power lies with the corporation, not the person. And again, what we have to understand is the cultural dynamic of what it is to be an American versus what it is to be a French person or a Swedish person, a German person, and their expectations that their culture has infused in them. All right, so that's going to be it for today. If you have any questions, please text or email me. If you are not in my class but still have a question, please leave a comment and I'll be happy to answer it. Thank you and have a marvelous day.